Hello and welcome to another modelling video. This is Alan from the McConnor Man at YouTube with another airbrush and model video. Today we will unbox, set up and use the Blackridge airbrush system. One of the most affordable and readily available retail airbrush in Australia from Super Cheap Auto, who has sent me to review and demonstrate. I'm a former employee of the store more than a decade ago and actively use their gear. The head office has noticed and is supporting myself and other small grassroots bloggers and YouTube channels. For 80 Australian dollars, you're equipped with an old style HS2 hseng airbrush manufactured in China out of steel and brass. A pretty thorough instruction book giving you quite a bit of warnings and tips on operating, full specs and all. Does fail to mention how to set up the needles and nozzles. Fear not, we'll cover that in this video. A hard protective case. The airbrush itself is a top load gravity feed with a double action trigger and needle stopper at the end. Air input 1/8 inch feed. Nozzle wrench. A rubber hose adapter. An additional set of needles and nozzles. The 0.5 nozzle has an additional nozzle housing for greater flow. Pre-equipped with a 0.2mm needle and nozzle, which we'll remove immediately. For the retail price, this is a decent amount of gear to be sold. Super Cheap Auto were very kind to allow me to pick up for free and review as I see fit. Airbrushes are designed to spray a range of mediums. Coming out of an auto shop, it's assumed that it will spray paints for hobby to actual car purposes. 0.2 needle is very fine and designed for fine detail or higher viscosity mediums such as water to inks. Not quite appropriate for paint. We'll be removing it immediately. It's easy as taking care to remove the front nozzle and the rear housing. Quarter twist the needle nut and remove the needle all the way out. With the wrench, completely remove the nozzle on the end. Put away in the protective cases. I would recommend pulling out the 0.5 for beginners, it's easy flow, or a 0.3 for a standard operation. The spray crown tip needs to be disassembled and the needle housing put away. Get the larger one for the 0.5 and screw together. Notice how the 0.5 needle housing is slightly longer than the 0.3 and 0.2 one. Screw in the 0.5 nozzle. Take care the thread is very thin and can shear off. Use the wrench with only one finger until tight with minimal force. Care also needs to be taken with the needle in putting in and slowly pushing. If there's any resistance, pull out and check. Seating means to push the needle all the way into the nozzle until it's sticking out. An ideal healthy airbrush needle and nozzle will stick out by 1mm in the correct configuration. A shorter or bent needle or a split nozzle will poke out further, or a block nozzle will not have the needle sticking out as much. It will not operate as effectively. When the needle nut is tightened, the needle should be sticking in and out when the trigger is maneuvered. Airbrushes are a precision tool and need to be cleaned and maintained frequently. Disassembling is one of the first steps you should be learning by pulling it apart, putting it back together frequently until you get the hang. Take the back off and remove the inner sleeve, which comes in 3 to 4 components: a spring, an outer sleeve and an inner sleeve. This pinches the nut and goes backwards and forwards. Further breakdown, the trigger on the top pushes down to allow air in. Remove the crown and nozzle. With a bottle brush or wire, clean out the little space in there, they'll have debris. These airbrushes are sold dry and a bit tight when metal on metal is operating. The spillage of paint can seize it completely. Lubrication will improve operation. I like to use petroleum jelly. With a Q-tip or cotton bud, very lightly glaze all threads and moving components, including the air valve. The trigger is most likely will be stuck and is very difficult to slot straight into the air valve. Make sure when you click it, it pushes the bottom of the air valve in and out. This may take a while. past the trigger, the needle assembly can be greased far more heavily. Put the spring inside the housing and the rest of the needle column. Make sure it springs up and down smoothly. The tongue is tipped in and forward all the way to the little reservoir behind the trigger. Screw all the way in. Glaze the second 2/3 of the needle and slot into the needle trigger assembly all the way until it's seated to the tip. Screw in the needle nut nice and tight. By maneuvering the trigger, the entire assembly should be springing backwards and forwards quite smoothly. The rear screw on the housing is the needle stopper. You can screw it in to prevent the needle going all the way back, which is good for beginners or production painting. The paint cap is a snug fit, preventing sloshing or spillage. Most hobby compressors have a 1/8 hose that threads on, and larger compressor systems have regulators that has adapters that you can attach a hose. All of this also sold at Super Cheap Auto. Mix and shake a separate amount of paint before adding into your airbrush. The ratio is 2 part thinner to 1 part paint. Automotive lacquers seated with a 0.5 needle and nozzle. Put your finger at the end of the tip crown for nice seal. Push down and pull back gently, allowing air to escape from the cup and mixing the paint. Set your PSI to about 10 or 15 and away you go. Pushing down allows the air to pass out, and pulling the trigger back allows the paint to go through. You want air flowing before you have paint flowing, or it will build up around the needle. An ideal test is just spraying a thin and thick line and colouring in a piece of paper. With a loaded pressured airbrush, under no circumstances are you to pull the needle out or disassemble. Drain the paint, clean out, disassemble to find out what you've done wrong, and go back to the assembly instructions. Poor flow, no flow, or spluttering could be a sign of incorrectly mixed paint or damage to the needle and nozzle. Second test to perform is painting non-porous surfaces. Plastic spoons is pretty ideal to see that you've got a good atomization rate of pressure thinned paint and a working airbrush. Very gently spray lightly paint across the spoon, starting to spray off the surface and dusting across the entire length of it, turning the air off once you finish the pass. This will net a smooth result without too much flooding or drip of paint or texturing like orange peel. Cleaning is essential to changing colours or finishing your painting session. Reclaim the paint by returning it to its container. Wipe out the paint cup with a towel or tissue. Remove the nozzle, clean that. Wipe out the inner crown cap to prevent a build-up of paint. I like to add a bit of thinner to the towel. Relubricating might be required. Super Cheap Auto and other places sell thinners, paint cleaners, general purpose thinners, which all remove lacquer and automotive paints. Fill up the cup, and utilizing the paint method of putting your finger at the end and pulling the trigger back will flush the paint out. Keep flushing paint with thinner until the thinner goes clear. I've been airbrushing for over 10 years, and this YouTube channel contains a lot more tips and videos covering these methods in slower and greater detail, especially for beginners or returning artisans. Please do not be stressed if you haven't picked up everything from this video, and have a look at my airbrush playlist on this very YouTube channel. The Super Cheap Auto Black Ridge airbrush is a fine airbrush, and the hseng models is a line I stand by and use frequently to this day. Super Cheap Auto does stock the additional needles and nozzles in case of breakage, which is very likely to occur. This is a rarity for hobby shops, airbrush resellers and retail outlets in Australia. What I honestly personally love about Super Cheap Auto is it's got quite a few ranges and products that I do enjoy using in my hobby, especially in bulk and a far more affordable price to tiny small bottles of paint, including top coat, primer and rattle cans. The new color spec line that they are utilizing has a database of many paint colors that you can get mixed and purchased in quantities as tiny amount as 40 milliliters. Mixing and utilizing paint on models is a topic I will cover in a future video. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, until next time, stay tuned for further content. Check out the description section for references and links to social media, and we'll catch you guys next time. See you later.